Hi there, Manchester, Auburn, Hooksett. This is the progress report for this Wednesday, August 22nd. Can you believe it's only 3 weeks to the primary and throughout New Hampshire on the midterm elections, and then you think you're seeing a lot of yard signs and campaign signs now? Wait till then. You're going to see a lot more, and there will be a lot of activity. And we've been doing a lot of political shows, as people out there know, because it is campaign season. And we will do more, but we're taking a real break from politics as usual tonight, and I think we've got a really interesting program. We're going to talk about the opioid crisis. I know, you've heard all about it. Well, you haven't heard all about it, because we've got some people who can provide a different and more in-depth insight with us tonight. And there is a problem with our attack on the opioid crisis, the way we're doing it. And we have a person with us who has a real good story to tell about that, and she will as we get going. But, as is always highly anticipated, much awaited, the POTUS report on the progress report is about to be launched by the irrepressible Mike Farley. Here he is.
Well, thank you, Bob. I heard from some folks that you really hyped this week's POTUS report on the progress report on the Facebook page, but it's kind of understated, so let's begin. There it is. What more is there to say? Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. I think yesterday watching the news was, in a way, if Hiroshima and Nagasaki had happened on the same day and we were able to watch it on television on a split screen.
They were only 3 days apart.
They were, but this combined the two. And I'm at a loss for words. If I need to say anything, then I just am not getting it, I guess. But I do want to read a very quick quote from Steve Schmidt. Now, Steve Schmidt's a former Republican. He did leave the Republican Party just a couple months ago because
he's rational.
Yeah, he's a very rational actor. But he's a high-level campaign communications strategist. He's worked for George Bush. He's worked for John McCain. So this is not some radical Democrat talking, but this is a quote from Steve Schmidt this morning. "This means Trump's presidency is not only illegitimate but criminal. It means the presidential election was compromised by the most insidious criminal conspiracy in American history. It means Trump is a traitor and Putin determined the outcome. The impeachment bar has been reached." And I think that he really sums it up very concisely in that. And I have nothing more to add, Bob. I just
well, that certainly tells it like he thinks it is, and I happen to, of course, to agree. I mean, stunning news yesterday for sure. But that's all we're going to do for politics tonight, unless callers want to bring it up, and we'll probably let you, as long as you're, meet the standards for decency and so forth.
We have standards for decency here, Bob?
Well, they're not
Holy
very
cow,
high
I better
standards.
be
They're
careful.
pretty low standards, but yeah, I guess we do. And you know the number. It's 640-3091 if you want to call in and join us, and we always welcome callers.
And this is a topic, Bob, that I think our callers would be able to contribute a lot, and we'd like
I
to
hope
encourage
so.
them to call on this
But
one.
I'm very excited about the guests we've got with us today, because I think they're going to offer a lot of personal stories and provide a broader perspective as well. And I guess I'd like to start with you, Jen, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
Jen Sager is dealing with a chronic pain issue that she's had for years and years, and she described it to me just a few minutes ago as the invisible illness. Well, a lot of the mental problems are invisible illnesses, aren't they, too? But chronic pain certainly can be. You can look like you're fine on the outside and be really screaming with pain on the inside. And Jen, tell us a little bit about yourself and what your problems were and what your problems were in getting the treatment you needed.
Well, about 20 years ago, I was working, and I started having problems functioning. I felt terrible all the time. I was tired, and I was really starting to hurt. And I started this whole process of looking for doctors to tell me what was wrong, because I knew something was wrong. And, I bounced around from different primary doctors to specialists to, all over the place. Tons of lab work, tests, all these weird procedures. And after about 5 years, they said, well, we know you have a connective tissue disorder, but we don't know what kind. And at that time, the only treatment was to put you on prednisone, which is a steroid, to shut off your immune system from attacking healthy cells. So I did that for a few years. and that caused other problems. And then finally, I found a rheumatologist who was willing to look into this more deeply. And after 2 more years of tests and whatnot, he said, well, we think we know what it is, sort of. This is how we can treat it, but, you know, it's an experiment. They don't really know for sure. And this whole time, it was just getting worse and worse. And about 7, 8 years ago, I had to stop working because I was working
What was your job at the Mayo?
I was working in Manchester as a teaching assistant for, I started in the ELL program, which I loved, and then I was working in special ed, which I loved. And it was a very physical job, but I
Oh,
really
yeah.
liked working with the kids, and it gave me a lot as well. So having to stop working, you know, kind of broke my heart because I really enjoyed what I was doing. And so at that point, they said, well, now we got to do more tests and blah, blah, blah. So they had me on 2 years of trying all these different medications for things like, you know, anti-inflammatories, anti-epileptics, you know, antidepressants. You know, doctors don't want to give you pain medication until you've tried literally everything else. So I tried.
Because the pain medication is potentially addictive, is that the
Right,
reason?
and they're worried that some people might just, you know, use pain medication wrongly, and they want to make sure that that's like the last resort. Like maybe these other things will work and they're not addictive, so we'll try that first. And I understood that.
Really?
But the problem was, my whole problem with all of my different conditions, and I have several, was I couldn't sleep for more than an hour at a time because the pain was so bad, I literally just couldn't even lay on the bed.
Think
So-
about that, folks, sleeping not more than an hour at a time. That's real pain in itself.
It makes you crazy. And then one doctor said, well, you seem depressed. And I said, well, you'd be depressed too if you haven't slept more than an hour at a time for a few years. It starts to wear you down. And I was getting really desperate. And I told my doctor at one point, and I was sort of joking, but not really. Because at that point, I was just, you know, I was straight out. And I told him, I says, you know, I'm at the point now where I don't care if I wake up in the morning. Like,
Really?
I was done. I'd had it. It was
And
just,
you've never had any suicidal thoughts before this?
no, I was, you know, I was always a very, you know, you can ask anybody that knows me, I'm like ridiculously positive to the point where it's probably annoying sometimes. and I can be, but, you know, I'm always trying to see the silver lining. So for me to actually sit there in bed thinking, just let me die in my sleep, I've had it.
That's pretty extreme.
It was, and it was scary, and it scared me, but you get to that point where you're like, you just can't take it. And sleep deprivation is not good. It causes
Certainly isn't.
other issues, and, you know, after, you know, years and years of this just getting progressively worse, you know, I was a little bit out of my mind. So when I said that to my doctor, after trying all these other meds, he says, well, okay, maybe we can try pain medication because nothing else is working for you.
How long had you been dealing with this problem of pain before you got to that point?
Probably 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah. And I worked for
goodness.
10 of those years and just worked through the pain. I'd go home and I'd sleep for 2 hours the minute I got home every day. Because I was a single mom. I was raising my son. I couldn't just not work.
Wow.
So you know, we had a system when he was in 3rd grade and I started working for the school department. I'd grab him, go home, set him up with his toys and his games and his snacks, and I'd sleep on the couch, and he knew what to do, and that was our routine.
We should
But-
probably let folks know that you're married now, right?
Yes.
You're actually, your husband here, he brought me a book, which I
Yes,
thought was
he
very
did.
nice. I'm
His
looking forward to reading it.
Hard work for the last year and a
Yeah.
half. But yeah, so when I met my husband, it's kind of funny. We met, and about a year later, I ended up not being able to work. So I joke with him that, you know, there's no warranty, there's no exchanges. You know, he got the older model, so he's stuck with me now.
For rich or poor and sick as a mill, something like that.
You know, I got it in writing. He can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so after all that, basically, I just, you know, the doctor gave me the medicine. I got the prescription. I went home. I took it the first night, and literally half an hour later, I was in tears. It took my pain down from, I want to, you know,
These
scream.
were tears of joy.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I got mad, and I'm like, why the heck didn't you give me this sooner? You know, it's like the smallest, lowest dose opioid out there. It's like a baby opioid.
Yeah.
And he really,
Does it have a trade name? What?
it's Tramadol, yeah, or Ultram. It's been around forever. There's no side effects. really. You know, it can cause you to be a little dehydrated, and that's about it.
Okay.
So I took it, and I remember I was just sitting on the couch, like, you know, where was this stuff? You know, I've wasted so much time. Maybe I could have kept working if I'd had this,
Yeah.
you know. And being in that much pain, you tend to just, you tense up, and then you pull other muscles. It causes other
Oh, yeah. Oh,
injuries, and then it's just a snowball effect. Now I have issues that I wouldn't have had if I'd had pain management beforehand. So after all that, right around when Trump got elected, I had a moment, and I thought, you know, I need to do something productive. I felt compelled to do something.
You had not gone back to work.
No, I'm permanently disabled.
Okay.
I've been, you know, I'm done. So all of my conditions just get worse over time. So it's not like it's going to improve. It's not like it's going to get better. Right now, it's just, you know, preventing more damage. So I started a support group online on Facebook for people with chronic pain conditions. And just on a whim, you know, I thought, you know, there's groups out there, they weren't very good. I'll do my own. It turned out to be one of the best things I've ever done.
Yeah.
And I met so many great people, and it was a fun group. We were all trying to cheer each other up, and we tried to make it like a fun, positive thing.
These were all people that had similar, probably nobody has an identical story, but people had sort of similar stories.
A
to
lot
yours.
of autoimmune disorders, a lot of arthritis, fibromyalgia, things like that you
These
don't
are
look.
some of the things that you've been diagnosed
Oh
with.
yeah, I've got all that, and scleroderma, and they thought it was lupus, and it's, you know, there's just everything sort of, once you get one autoimmune disorder, you tend to get others at some point. They kind of like play together. So yeah, I did that, and then about a year ago, after Jeff Sessions got on TV and said, you know, you don't need painkillers, just take an aspirin and, you know, tough it out. That's kind of when I
Yeah.
went on a little mission to make sure people knew that, you know, opioids aren't, you know, bad. You know, it's not.
They're bad if abused, like,
Right, and like anything,
Many
can,
things in life.
anything can be abused. It's
Yeah.
what you
Well,
do
I'd
with
be
it.
careful about making judgment on the other side either. Because an addict who consumes opioids, to call it abuse, to imply that addiction is a disease in and of itself, and
Right.
it has its own symptoms, and among those symptoms are the use of the addictive compounds. So I think we have to be very careful to be sensitive to both sides.
And that is one of my beefs now is, you know, words do matter. When people say opioids are bad, they're saying, when they're referring to street drugs. I said, well, why don't you say heroin and meth and illegal drugs?
Well,
say that.
no, but that wouldn't be accurate, because the street drugs are the very same painkillers that people who have the conditions that you're suffering from are taking
Well, yeah.
with the doctor's prescription. They're the same medication. They're made by the same factories, and they're being dumped on the streets. So I think we have to be careful. We can't just draw a very bright line between
Oh, no,
street
I
drugs
wasn't-
bad,
I wasn't saying
prescription drugs not bad.
No, I'm probably not wording it correctly, but, you know, for me, I'm finding out in the world and online that when you say you're on pain medication, people assume now that anybody taking opioids for any reason are addicts, which isn't true. Addiction is a completely different disease, and it needs its own treatment and its own, you know, attention. And I think to lump in people with chronic pain conditions with addicts, with people that, you know, for
Well,
whatever
what do you mean
use.
by lump in? I
It-
think that's a
what-
pejorative term. We're trying to help these addicts.
But
We
addicts'
have concern
addiction is
about these
different than
addicts.
people that need it for pain medication. I guess that's where I'm not making myself clear. For me, I'm not addicted to it, I'm dependent on it. Because without it, I don't have any quality of life and I can't function. If I don't have it for a while, I don't go through withdrawals. I just have a lot of pain and it's awful. But like someone with addiction, it's a different reaction. And I think what I'm seeing
I
out
think
there
they would
is
describe it as a
people-
lot of pain and awful.
Oh, well, no, it's
I
horrible.
think they would describe it in the
trust
same
me,
words.
It's horrible.
So
And-
I don't think anyone's wrong right now, but I think what the piece that's missing is the lack of education. So Purdue didn't say, you know, they inaccurately stated how addictive opioids are, and that's just the truth. Opioids are addictive.
You're talking about the report that went out to all the doctors.
Right.
Here's a great substitute.
Yeah.
Right.
They're not as addictive as what
So
you're currently
because
prescribed.
of
Right.
that lack of education or miseducation or
Deliberate false information, maybe.
false information, fake news, you know, the people receiving them are now, you know, we have an epidemic. And it's not because of people who have chronic pain, and it's not because of people who have addiction. It's because the miseducation or the false information that was given. So now who's suffering the most is not the people who made the money off of it. It's you. It's the
And-
people who now, you know, who shoot up fentanyl.
And that's where I was going, was that, you know, Big Pharma flooded the market, so there were opioids everywhere. Doctors were just like, you know, handing them out like candy, and people got addicted that shouldn't have.
That's the diversion problem that we
Right.
talked about
But in,
before the
and
show.
so for the doctors, the reason that happened is because if they didn't give them out, the people that they denied the pain meds to would give bad reviews, and then less people would go see those doctors.
Yeah, but I'll tell you right now, that's the opposite that's happening, because now doctors are taking away opioids from people that need them, and they're being told to cut their prescriptions by a third. Pick a third of your clients and tell them they can't have their medicine anymore. And that's what I'm noticing in my group, because it's nationwide, worldwide, is instead of a fun support group, now it's turning into a suicide watch, because every other week it's somebody else went to an appointment for their long-term pain control that they've never had a problem with, and they're being told, well, we don't do opioids here anymore, so we're not going to give you any more prescriptions. Good
Well,
luck.
this is exactly the area I want to particularly get into, and I want to have Nikki introduce herself, too. And I'm having a nice conversation with Jen, but it's time for Nikki to get involved. So, as we usually do in the progress report, we're going to take a couple of breaks, and this will be the first one right now. It'll be very brief. When we come back, I'll ask Nikki to introduce herself, and then I think we'll talk about maybe some of the issues you're dealing with in your life, if you want to, but at least the larger issue. And I phrase it this way, you know, the pendulum swung way one way with this, what'd you call it, the Pew Report or something like that? Purdue Report.
Purdue Report.
Yeah, and, you know, certainly the State House, it was a great feeling that really the heart of the problem was overprescription by doctors of these morphine, opioid-based drugs, OxyContin and the others. And there's been a huge emphasis on that. Now the question is, and I got this from hearing Jen at a rally at the State House Plaza a week and a half ago, I guess. Now the issue is, has the pendulum swung too far the other way, where people like Jen, and there are many others like her, are having trouble getting the help they desperately need to deal with chronic pain in their lives, which is, as she said so eloquently, very debilitating. So that's what we'll come back to as soon as we get back, and we'll be right back, folks. And please call in 640-3091 if you want to join this conversation. Hope you do. Bye. Mike has something to say about access to this content that we
Well,
got for you.
in the break, and it is something that we should make you folks aware of. We know you folks are watching on Channel 23 on Comcast cable in Manchester, Hooksett and Auburn, but you can also live stream the program. And I should know the website, but I don't, so I Google it. MPTS Manchester. MPTS is Manchester Public Television Service. And you go to that website, you click on Channel 23, you can live stream the show anywhere in the world. If you'd like to watch it as we're presenting it, you can see schedules, and there's a whole bunch of other information on that. So,
And we have
another alternative.
We have material on this program you're not going to see anywhere else on this in this system, like the program we've got tonight. I think this is really, really important information with firsthand knowledge. So, Nikki, we're glad you're here.
Thanks.
And it's delightful to have you, but tell us a little bit about yourself and what your role in this issue is.
Sure. So I am a woman in long-term recovery from drugs and alcohol. My main substance was alcohol, but I abused lots of different things. I put anything in my body and I could become addicted to it. My first addiction was working out when I was 12, which turned into anorexia, and then, the substances were introduced. And so my first time trying to get sober was 19 or 20. And then from there, couldn't stay sober, and finally did when I was 27, and went to rehab, transitional living for women, went on to sober living for women, became a house manager. From there, I worked at an in-home addiction treatment program, and from that, I now have my current position, which is a director of a recovery center in Nashua, New Hampshire.
And that's called what?
Revive Recovery Center. And so our model there is we approach all pathways to recovery, which means that you can be on methadone or Vivitrol or Suboxone, or you could be, you could use opioids and have another substance that you have an issue with, but be taking those. And if you say that you're sober, for you, that is sober. So we, recovery from, when we kind of looked at it in the 1930s through the big book, AA is very different now, which is a really good thing.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, I'm interested in that.
In early AA meetings, you, couldn't be a woman. You couldn't take blood thinners, high blood pressure medicine, antidepressants, when really the opposite of that. Bill W., one of the founders of AA, I won't say, well, he took psychedelics when he got sober and found God and all sorts of things, which isn't really discussed in the big book, but, and I might get in trouble for saying that because it's kind of controversial and people don't really like that statement.
But now we know.
So now we know, and recovery is different, and it's not, total abstinence isn't necessarily a good thing. I drink a lot of coffee and I smoked cigarettes when I got sober, and
Well, give up the cigarettes.
I did. I stopped smoking. I don't smoke
Well,
cigarettes
good.
anymore.
Overcome many addictions then.
Yeah. So, her story is really amazing because within the recovery community, there's a stigma that we have to deal with, and some of that comes within the recovery community, and then there's society. But yours is kind of like the silent stigma.
Oh, absolutely. It's, it's like anybody with an invisible illness that doesn't look sick, much like an addict doesn't look sick. We all get stigmatized, and now we're all being treated.
But
boy,
I'm going to push back on that again. I'm sorry. I just keep pushing back on you. I'm hoping to do it gently, but aren't we changing things? Isn't that stigma? For 40 years we've been fighting the mental illness stigma, and I think progress is being made. It's slow, I understand,
Yeah.
but the world's an old place, and it's going to go on for a long time, so slow progress is still progress. Are we not making some progress? I'm looking at the problem that we have with the illegal opioid use that's resulting in overdose deaths on the streets of Manchester. Mm-hmm. That's a bad thing, and very easy to stigmatize and us versus them, that situation. Mm-hmm. But I think our officials in our community are trying to look at it differently and trying to have some compassion for those people. We are tearing our hair out trying to come up with different programs such as yours, and to coordinate them so that we can take care of these people. And I think that shows some compassion and that's some bending of the stigma, I guess. Do you see that, or do you still feel
yes,
that
no.
it's just black and white?
It's not, but in a lot of ways, there's been a lot of progress made, because most people know addiction doesn't make you a bad person. It's a disease like any other disease, and it requires treatment and compassion. And what I'm noticing, though, lately, because of things that are being said, I'm sorry, by the Republicans, who are really demonizing all opioids, is not only are they, pointing to people with addiction problems like they're criminals, which they're doing, they're pointing to anybody that takes opioids like they're bad too. And it's this new thing that wasn't happening like this. It was actually getting better. People were actually, more compassionate. They knew more about addiction. They understood people with chronic illnesses. More people were becoming educated, and it was definitely improving until about a year ago, where I saw a huge shift online, in person, where a lot of people just, I'm sorry, they swallowed the Kool-Aid, and they're like, oh yeah, opioids are bad. Anyone that takes them is an addict, and you're all criminals, because they believe that. We know it's not true. But there's this little group of people who I won't name, but it seems like they want to believe this because they want to somehow look down on
Well,
people.
it simplifies the problem, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
You don't have
And
to
I
care
think
about
that's
those
part
people.
of the propaganda that's being pushed. It's like, when you demonize something, when you make somebody look like a criminal or a bad person, it's so much easier to mistreat them by saying, oh, we're not funding addiction recovery centers anymore. Oh, you're not getting your pain medication anymore because you're bad, or you might get addicted, and oh, addiction's so bad now, we're going to take everything away from everyone. And as you know, you've probably dealt with this yourself, funding's being cut, services are being cut, people aren't getting their medication. So it started sort of all at this juncture about a year ago, where suddenly it was this, and everybody jumped on the bandwagon to start demonizing opioids, for any reason. And the problem is, we do have a huge addiction problem. There are tons of people that aren't getting the treatment they need, and they're being looked down on as criminals. I mean, you go on, there's Facebook sites for Manchester, and they talk about overdoses and opioid problems, and everybody in there commenting is nasty. And they are
That's
mean.
why you shouldn't go on Facebook.
Well, we're not in there anymore, but that was, I knew, I had to look. I wanted to know, what are people thinking? Because you start hearing things, and it's like, why are they saying this? And I know why. It's because they're being fed misinformation on
Yeah.
purpose.
I have to say, Nikki, when you describe yourself as you just did as a person in recovery from various addictions, I don't think most people would have the image of you when they think of a person in recovery. You look extremely, very attractive, obviously, very well spoken, and seem to have a lot of joie de vivre. I mean, it's just amazing, and I think that's something that people should take away from this. And same for you, Jen. I mean, my good friend, longtime colleague in the practice of law, former Chief Justice John Broderick, is I'm sure you know, he's had problems in his own family, and he's made it a real cause of his to elevate mental illness generally, not just addiction, but mental illness generally, to the same status of concern and level of care that we have for physical ailments. And it's like you go into the emergency room
I
and
point out after it affected him.
after it affected him, and well, that's the way things
That's
usually
the,
are.
that's the majority.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
kind of the way.
I don't call those people heroes. I'm sorry. I'm a little tough on folks that get religion once they get it right in their face. I think
But that's
you got to get outside
but
yourself a little
no,
bit
that's
sometimes.
what it takes for some people, and like cognitively, they may just be wired that way. They might not be able to actually comprehend something until it's like right in front of them. Sometimes it really.
I will accept your statement, and I will mull on that a little bit.
Once in a while, we have disagreements on this show. It doesn't happen a whole lot, but it
I'm
does
not
happen
disagreeing
occasionally.
with you, though. That's
but I've
it's a point of view that I had not previously taken. Let's
And
put it
I've
that
heard
way.
him speak before about that, and he was very humbled.
Yeah.
He was very honest and very humbled because he was, prestigious, and he had this
Yes.
image of himself and his family. And
Yes, and it affected a lot of lives up to
I mean,
and
it's
prior
supposed-
to that
Yeah.
point.
Suppose you went to the emergency room and you said, I've got some severe chest pains, and they say, take 2 aspirin and call us in the morning, the classic thing.
Right.
Almost what you said Jeff Sessions said about your condition,
He
you
said
know?
basically,
And
you
why,
don't need
why,
pain
why,
meds.
why is that acceptable to do that? It's
Right.
not. If you have a heart condition, But it seems to be in other areas that it's not physical ailments, but other things, so.
Well, and then part of the problem where kind of the addiction comes in, maybe, is that doctors aren't educated. I think they are now that we have a crisis, but they weren't educated on how addictive opioids were. So clients would become
And they
addicted.
were actually told that they were less addictive
Right.
than
They were.
actually
Yeah.
were, too.
So
They
then-
were really misled.
They
I gotta give them
were.
some.
They absolutely were. So their clients would come in and show signs of addiction, and they'd cut them off. And you don't die from withdrawals, physical withdrawals. There's the mental aspect of the
Oh, yeah.
depression and all
Right.
that stuff. So alcohol is kind of the only one that you can physically die from the withdrawals. But that's when people would go to the streets. It's
It's-
because
they
the doctor would-
self-medicate,
they would
exactly.
self-medicate.
Absolutely.
Let's
Yeah.
talk to Sandy on line one. We have a caller. Hello, Sandy. You're on the progress report. We're glad to have you join us. Would you like to make a question or make a comment?
Hi, Bob. And,
Hi.
Hi, Bob and
Hey, Sandy.
Polly. How you doing? It's Sandy Paradise.
Yeah.
Hi,
I just
Sandy.
wanted to make a comment. My granddaughter has a doctorate in pharmacy, and she's been working in this pharmacy down in Louisiana. And when people come in with 120, they want 120 pills or 180 pills, she brings them over to the consultation place. They have a little place where you can sit down and consult with the pharmacist. And she tells them, please ask your doctor to just give you 30 at a time. She says, and she'll talk nicely with them. Caitlin is very good person, and she's very gentle and bubbly. Anyway, she will she will tell them, if you have any children at home or teenagers at home, anyone that's under 18, 19 years old, you put these pills where no one else knows where they are. No one. And then she asked the owner of the pharmacy if she could do that. She did it to one person. And he said, yes, Caitlin, you can do that. You can do that. So she was happy with that because down in Louisiana, they have a crisis down there too. They have a lot down in New Orleans. She lives in Mandeville across Lake Pontchartrain. But she said,
I've driven that bridge many times.
Pardon me?
I've driven over that causeway many times.
Have you? Oh,
Taking
that's
the trip to
25 Mile
Mandeville.
Causeway. I'll tell you. Oh God. Yeah, it's not fun to drive over. I've only driven over it once.
You didn't like
And
it?
Patrick, no. And Patrick tells me that the cars sometimes go over and they're in 12 feet of water. It's only 12 feet deep, that Lake Pontchartrain. It's crazy.
Yep.
But anyway, these two ladies are very interesting. But it's funny how she came up with this. She goes, I don't think the doctors should be giving that amount. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And she would talk to the people, nicely as she could, like, what do you use them for, and so on and everything. But she would definitely tell them if they had small children at home or up to the age of teenagers, you put those where even your husband doesn't know where they are, or no one knows where they are except you, and you
Okay.
lock them up somewhere.
We got it, Sandy. Thanks
So
for the
anyway, I
call.
just want to make that comment. And her pharmacist, who owns the pharmacist, said, that's fine, Katie. She's
Perfect.
done it to 3 or 4 people, and actually their doctors have cut down on the dosage that they give them. And so it's worked a little bit anyway. But, I think a lot of it has to do with the mental problems, the dysfunctional families today, the whole thing.
Well,
I'm gonna be
Sandy, I
81,
think that's
so,
a problem
Bob.
bigger than what we can deal with here today. But I do appreciate your call about the diversion
Yeah.
issue, and we can talk about
Yeah,
that.
isn't that something? huh?
Thanks for the
If
call.
But if everybody thought of different, things, the mental health, see, there's so much to. And I'll tell you, that lady who was speaking about being in pain for so long, I went through a similar thing about 10 years ago. And you might have Lyme disease. Oh, you might have this. You might have that. You might have chronic fatigue syndrome. I ended up, I have lupus.
Huh.
And it took almost 9 months. And there was a time, I remember on Christmas Eve, when
Sandy.
I came home from my brother's house, and I was all swollen and limping, and
Sandy,
I said,
we
you know
gotta
what? I don't care if I get up tomorrow
we
morning.
gotta get
So
on
I
with
know where
we'll
she's
get
coming
on with
from,
our
but
guests.
She sounded like it's worse,
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks for the call.
God
Thanks for
bless
calling.
you, and
All righty. We got to move on. We're going to run out of time on the show. But she does bring a very interesting solution to a very big problem. And we talked about this a little before the show,
Right.
the diversion problem.
Right.
Part of it is institutional. The big pharma literally just shipping more medication than a community could absorb in a lifetime.
Yeah.
But part of it is this unintentional bleeding off, these high number of large dose prescriptions.
Right.
Kids getting into the medicine cabinets.
I used to steal my mom's medication.
You know,
And
it's
it
not
does
uncommon.
happen.
It's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Really?
common enough that they're putting it in TV PSAs. So, I mean, it's something that's out there. People breaking into homes. I remember, I'm going to say maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a spate of CVS pharmacies getting broken into because they hadn't hardened them yet, and they were breaking in and taking the pain medication.
One of my girls in my group just got mugged coming out of the pharmacy because it was a pain clinic with a pharmacy there, and she got in the parking lot and they took her bag.
But
so it
I think
happens.
both of you,
Right.
in your experience, you can see how this is a personal problem, but it's also a societal problem.
Definitely.
And I think what I'm hearing from you is that you don't want to get all caught up in the wrong side of this thing to be over restricted. But what I wanted to ask is, and I don't know, Bob, maybe you know, is there a new policy? I know that they've been working on one, but if doctors are calling their patients and saying, I'm arbitrarily required to cut my opioid prescriptions by 1/3, where's that come from? Is that a state policy?
CDC new guidelines.
That's what I'd like you to
That's
talk
right.
about,
Yeah,
and both of you want to, but
Yeah.
that's what struck me is, has this pendulum gone too far?
Definitely.
And there was some
Because we
alarming
can really
things
talk,
said.
I mean, if this is a change of regulation
I mean,
where
you
these
know,
regulations put out the
Yes, these things
comment,
can be abused, but they, as you've been pointing out, they do a lot of good. They made a huge difference in your life.
It's medicine.
So
Yep.
how are we threading this needle between the problem of prescription drug abuse and not sufficient prescription drugs to treat problems?
What I'm seeing is with this new administration that we have that doesn't like to listen to doctors or scientists or facts
Yes.
or real evidence. They just decided, oh, we have an opioid crisis. Oh my goodness. Well, okay, well, let's just get rid of all the opioids. They
I think I
didn't-
just heard that they're cutting they've issued an order, I don't know how they can do this, what authority they can, to cut production of opioids by
Yeah.
10%. Just
They
like-
already have. And
I
I'll
mean,
tell you, it's
what's
been
that
going
about?
on for over a year now. People don't know about it because people like me in pain, we don't talk
but
about
that
it.
should not impact you, because in
It's
theory,
not supposed to. Legally,
in theory,
if
it's
you're
only
on,
taking the diverted drugs
if
off the street, isn't
what
that?
the plan was to take people that have a new injury and only give them like a week's supply. Okay, you're not getting it for a month. You only need this much. Great. Or to say, if you have surgery, you can have X amount of pills. You're not getting any more after that. We'll deal with the pain management while you're healing because you will get better. So you don't need pain medication forever because you will heal. That's fine. Problem is, what they also started doing is saying, oh, well, we need to start cutting opioids everywhere. So we're going to tell all the doctors, you got to cut your prescriptions of opioids by 1/3. Figure it out. And they've raided pain clinics. They've closed them all over the country. And a lot of people can only go to these pain clinics for their
But-
medication in some
Does that
states.
include here in New Hampshire, some pain clinics are closing?
I'm just,
There's
it's just
barely any pink.
there's
clinics in
hardly
New
any
Hampshire
here
anyway.
anyway.
really?
So
Oh, yeah.
it's I've been lucky because I am in New Hampshire. My doctor's office hasn't been impacted, but they are very wary about taking new patients with long-term pain needs. And some doctors will say, we don't do that, find a pain clinic, because they don't want to get in trouble or get investigated or get closed down while they investigate.
Some of these pain clinics that have been raided have actually been charged with crimes. I
Some
mean,
of them are bad,
So
yes, but not all of them, and
I'm
that's
not
the
saying
problem.
they are.
So
Right.
This is kind of the reality of it, and it just occurred to me. I haven't thought about this in a really long time, so it triggered it. Is when I managed a sober living house, I had a woman who, starting at 16, had knee problems, and she had tons of surgeries, and you could just, and at this point she was in her 40s, and you could see on her knees that like her legs were unleveled,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it was horrific. So honestly, like you could just see the pain. She became addicted to the fentanyl patch, really common. And so they took her off of it, but she had chronic pain.
Right.
But because she was an addict, they didn't want to handle it. So I was at work one day and I got called to come home because she had relapsed on fentanyl, specifically fentanyl. And I tried to get her into a pain management clinic because it was just clear like a rehab wouldn't touch it. Like she had the pain had to be addressed, but nobody would touch her. A few months later, she died of an overdose.
And that is happening. There are people literally, it's being so mismanaged that people are being killed by it.
That's a very dramatic and very, very sorry story to hear. Well, we're going to take our final break right now, folks, because that's what Brian's telling us to do. We try to do what he tells us. And we'll be right back with our final segment. And folks, you want to call in and participate in what I think is a very interesting and informative discussion, 640-3091. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. This is the final segment of this Wednesday, August 22nd.
It's moving quick. We got a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, progress report, and we could go for much more than the time we have available tonight. And we do have a caller, I believe.
It's,
Hello? Hello?
hello, Jennifer. You're on the progress report.
Hi there. You got something to say? Please do. You're with us. Go ahead.
I didn't hear what you said.
We're on a delay, so you may want to turn your TV down. That's very confusing because the TV's about 7 seconds behind us.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on back. You're live on the air.
Go right ahead. We're happy to have you join us.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I just wanted to say that I'm really happy that this topic has been brought up, and all four of you make some really good points. I'm Jennifer, and I'm actually a member of Jennifer's Pain Group, and I'm calling from Michigan, actually.
Hi, Jen.
Well, thank you for calling. We appreciate it.
That's
Well,
amazing.
thank you. I just want to say, I like I said, I'm glad that this topic is being discussed. I just wish it was more of a nationwide broadcast, actually, because it involves and affects people all over the place. Here in Michigan, we have clinics that are basically telling clients, too, that they're not here to prescribe painkillers. So.
So do you see, Jen, do you see this problem that the Jen who's here with us sees, that the pendulum may have swung to the point where people are not getting the pain medication that may be essential to letting them lead tolerable lives?
Yeah, I think that it's being, drastically reduced for the reasons that you've all been talking about, actually. And I just have quite a few issues with it because these people, like Jen is saying, have been dealing with chronic pain therapy for years, and it includes opioids, and now they're being ripped off of them. I understand the addiction side of it, but also from the chronic pain side of it, it's devastating. It's hugely a lifestyle change that is unfortunate for these people to be going through.
Okay, thank you very much for calling in. That's a nice contribution. We appreciate
Thanks for
it.
the call, Jen. We do appreciate a very insightful comment. What's the solution? What it seems to me, what I'm seeing, there seems to be a linchpin here at the doctor's office, and it seems that we have a conflict where maybe the doctors weren't being strong enough gatekeepers, but maybe now this arbitrary, whether it's 10%, 1/3, whatever, from on high is being imposed. Of course, that's not sensitive to the individual situation either. Maybe some doctors have 100% of their patients, which really do need this. So I wonder, is it a question of the doctors stepping up and maybe doing their job with a little bit finer hand? How do we solve this problem?
Honestly, this problem was a problem before Trump got in office. But since he's been there, it has gone from a problem to a problem. Because
Well, I think that's the division thing, isn't it?
The new guidelines for the CDC, now people have to comply, which is causing a lot of fallout from the, new rules. And, we even had, I think it was like 6 months ago, the World Health Organization actually put out a statement saying that withholding pain-relieving medications from people who are in chronic or severe pain is tantamount to torture. The World Health Organization said this about us, and, what we need is people in these positions in our government to hire doctors and medical professionals to come together and find a better way to handle this. You don't just say, oh, this thing is bad for everybody, get rid of it. That's not the way you do it.
Yeah.
We need to treat addiction as a separate thing from people using opioids for pain medication. They're not the same. You can be addicted and be in chronic pain, but they're two separate situations.
So
and
you're
what's
saying
happening.
that public health policy should be dictated by evidence and facts and not by ideology?
It would be nice. I'm sorry.
Okay, well,
Don't
at
even
least we've
get
gotten
me
to the
going
bottom
on
of this.
that. That's a whole new show. But yes, we need people that are highly educated and understand how medication works, understand addiction, understand that this isn't a black and white, one size fits all. There's different layers of different things going on. And to just say, get rid of a drug because it's bad for some people is ridiculous.
Or
because
arbitrary cutbacks on the availability of that
Right,
drug that
because
have no relation to
there-
evidence.
There's an epidemic now of women in my group, like Jen, who I'm amazed. I've never talked to her in person. We've always talked in my support group online. I'm just thrilled that she called. And, she's like one of the bravest people I know. And there's other girls in my group just like her that, all they do is they try to just get through each hour because of the situation. And it's the government that's making it worse. They're not handling it well. They're not handling addiction recovery services well. And they're not handling people with medical conditions. And we need new people.
Can I change the topic up just because this discussion presents us with an opportunity, and we touched on it a little bit in the break, and that is alternatives to the opioid medication regimen, in particular, in some states that have legalized medical marijuana and,
Right.
and gone beyond that. We're seeing science taking place where they're separating out the THC, the party side of medical marijuana, and they're focusing on pain relieving factors in this plant. It's been successful for a lot of people, maybe not for everybody, but what I'd like to hear both your opinions on whether that kind of work should be promoted and whether it's something that can be used in tandem with other policy changes.
So I think that the whole argument against marijuana actually stemmed, I think, back from like the early 1900s, and there was this propaganda that the government said that marijuana made I think it was like white women attracted to black men, right? So it was something like
Yes, there
really
was a very
just
racial
crazy.
component
Yeah.
to the policy.
So, I mean, it has nothing to do. And then it's like, marijuana is a gateway drug, and I really disagree with that. And I would have to say that alcohol, that's my personal opinion, is that alcohol, especially for me,
Well, I
is a
know a
gateway
lot
drug.
of the first responders on the opioid crisis do think marijuana is a gateway drug.
Well, also, I think we have to remember that marijuana today is very different than marijuana even like 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
It's very different, the THC
Much more
content.
potent.
Right. And there's now marijuana is being cut with fentanyl.
Right,
You know,
that's-
so there's all sorts of factors that go into it. And so if you get grade A medical marijuana, you are getting ideally a really pure product. But statistically, how many deaths do we see with marijuana as opposed to alcohol? Alcohol today is still the number one leading killer.
You know,
of all
I'm really
substances.
surprised to hear you say that, Nikki, and that's because you said you're in recovery and that you have been having a problem with abuse of many substances,
Mm-hmm.
and yet here you seem to be on the side of legalizing marijuana for
I am.
recreational use.
I'm
mean, that really
I'm also
surprises
an
me.
alcoholic, and I would never tell anyone that they shouldn't drink.
Okay,
I
good
have
point.
not, because I'm a certain way
point.
doesn't mean that everyone else is wired a certain way.
Yeah.
And there's been, you know, I have two sisters. Out of the three of us, I'm the only one with a drinking problem. So I would never say to my sisters who can sit there and have a glass of wine, one glass of wine, and be content. To me, that's alcohol abuse. Like I just don't I can't process how you could have one glass of wine.
Yeah.
So
Okay. You were telling us on that you've used many modalities to deal with your own issues: acupuncture, yoga, meditation. What has been the most? I mean, do these things all work? Do none of them work? What's been the most successful thing to get you to the point where you can be a real contributor and substance free?
So some people use the term they need tools for their toolbox, right? So I have a tool shed because it literally takes that much to keep me sober. So I need my therapist, I need my antidepressants, I need my women's meeting, I need my family, I need yoga, meditation. There's all sorts of things. There 12 steps. I used AA for a really long time. I still do. So there isn't one cure-all, and I think that's been part of the problem is it's like, oh, here, take, methadone, here, go to an AA meeting. It's not the way it works. We're not, a straight line.
I've heard the term continuum of care
Yeah.
used,
Right.
and I think it's appropriate in this particular context
Yes,
as well.
absolutely.
And that being that every person comes in and there's a broad spectrum of potential opportunities for care, and whatever works for that individual is
Yeah.
the approach that's going to be taken.
And ultimately, I was in some type of structured program for almost a year and a half. And that's really, and that's not even being on opioids. So if on opioids, it could potentially be longer because
Right.
of the effects on the brain
and,
if abused.
and we consider a 30-day program an extended stay.
I
for
call
opioid
that,
addiction.
well, people in recovery call that the dry out period. Like, that's like, take a pause.
We're in agreement on that.
Yeah,
I
it
mean, I
doesn't-
certainly don't
it's-
agree that to pat ourselves on the back that we're providing some 30-day treatment programs for people. That's not enough. My personal experience has been the best success comes when people actually go down to where there are some very good treatment centers in Florida, and they stay there for over a year.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of success in that.
Yeah. Well, then that
approach.
breaks down to insurance. And they just don't want to pay.
And it breaks down to a for-profit healthcare
That's a
system.
big,
is what it
expensive
breaks down
system
to.
to have
And that's
people in that sort of situation for years.
And that's the thing, like
But it
everybody's situation, whether you're dealing with addiction or chronic pain, you have to find what works for you, and it takes time.
Yep.
Like we started doing yoga. Okay, that helps me. I changed my diet a million times. I found one that works. And it's each person needs to go through that process to try things to see what works for them. And the problem is, if you don't have all the tools available to try, you're missing something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we're really saying here, all four of us, is that the the healthcare system in the United States is failing.
Yes.
A variety of ways. We've talked about imposing rules that don't make sense. We've talked about not having treatment available that does make sense. We've talked about the cost. We've talked about for-profit companies making profit at the expense of us.
And like that lady that called in earlier mentioning her, the pharmacist just, decided to, counsel this person and tell them they don't need their medication. That's happening a lot too, where people are getting involved in things that they have no business being involved in because they're not experts, they're not doctors. And a lot of people are chiming in that, they're making it more difficult for people to talk about it because there's a lot more confusion now.
Well, we're being told it's time to wrap up. This hour goes by very fast. We should have warned you about that. It certainly does. And I would ask you both, if you want to think about things that you think need to be done. I happen to be serving in the legislature and running for re-election, so I'm thinking about, is there anything can be done on the legislative front that we haven't thought of? Maybe you get some ideas on that. I'd love to hear about that from you too, because period for filing bills is coming right up. So there's all kinds of interesting things, and how we move this forward. Maybe the progress report is the start of something here to address the overreaction. I would say it's an overreaction to the opioid crisis by damning the people that need that drug. And
I don't know if I'm all the way there with you, Bob, but I do see that it's an issue that needs discussion.
Okay, well, that's
I'll join you.
okay. We'll settle for that at this point. Next week, folks, is August 29th. We'll be back, and it'll be with Donna Soucy, who's now the interim minority leader of the New Hampshire Senate, and she's running, as she always does, a very vigorous campaign for her reelection, and we will have her on with us next week, and I certainly look forward to that. She represents, one of our three senators representing parts of Manchester, the south part of Manchester, and the town of Litchfield. And
She's my senator, and a good senator she is.
And she's a good senator and damn hard worker, and we look forward to having her next week. And with that, I just want to thank Jen and Nikki. You've been terrific, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it's been very informative, and I appreciate your coming on and sharing your thoughts.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay. Next week, folks, on the Progress Report. Tune in.